Hey folks, it's Jared Mannanen from the website TahoeTrailGuide.com. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between beginner, intermediate, and advanced terrain at a groomed cross-country ski area, as well as some approaches to managing that terrain. This topic was a request from one of my subscribers, and it included the stipulation that a lot of the footage be point of view footage. I've also included a couple of clips of me diagonal striding, mostly uphill, in order to express some of the angles of terrain on some of this different terrain that I'm going to be showing. GoPros, because of their stabilization technology as well as the way that they process the imagery, those wide angle images, really flattens out the image. So it doesn't quite convey the steepness of terrain. Even if you're just standing above a really steep downhill and pointing that camera downhill, it still looks pretty flat. So it definitely won't have the same impact, even though it's from a point of view, my point of view. But it should get us in the ballpark as to what it could look like to ski in beginner, intermediate, and advanced terrain. I also want to point out that those same features of stabilization and the wide angle view makes it look like you're going slower than you truly are. So just keep that in mind as you're watching me ski downhill. I've split this video into 4 different parts. The first part, which we're watching right now, is of me skiing about a 3-mile green loop or beginner loop. The second route is a blue route. The third route is mostly black. And then the fourth segment, the last segment of this, is me skiing downhill from the highest point at this cross-country ski resort, starting at black, and then as I make my way down the hill, transitioning through blue and then green terrain. The last logistical note that I'd like to point out about producing a video with a lot of point of view footage, I don't use a mount on my body when capturing that footage. I actually hold out the camera in front of me with my right hand using a small tripod, and then I hold my ski poles in my opposite hand. So it does affect the way that I ski downhill. Basically, I play it a lot more conservatively because I have one eye on the camera and one eye on the terrain. And going down some of that black terrain, I find that I have to slow down a lot more than I normally would because, again, I'm capturing footage as much as I am skiing. With that said, you're going to notice 2 different sounds as I'm skiing downhill. One is going to be a little bit higher pitched whining sound like a zzzz. And that's going to be the scales of my grip zone slightly dragging on the snow as I'm beelining it down the hill. The other sound you're going to hear is going to be more of a shh, and that's me shaving off speed going downhill, whether that's using a snow plow, a half snow plow, or going into some sort of modified parallel turn. I point that out because in addition to talking about just the differences between these different terrain selections, I want to talk a little bit about management of terrain or approaches that you can use to safely negotiate terrain that may or may not be beyond your current skill level. And when you hear the slight variation in the sound of my skis, just make a mental note of that. How am I approaching this terrain? Now keep in mind, I know these trails very well, so I know how they bank, how they turn, how steep they are, how shallow they are. But this can also be a part of your experience learning a little bit more about terrain management. The first thing to know about the rating system for each cross-country ski area or alpine resort, for example, is that there's no real standardization amongst all mountain resorts. The rating system for each groomed ski area is specific to that groomed ski area. So greens, blues, and blacks, beginners, intermediate, and advanced terrain, it's all going to be related to each other in that same area. Now, there are generalities that you're going to find amongst all groomed resorts, and for the most part, you won't find huge discrepancies between blue terrain at one resort and blue terrain at another, but there will be variations between those ski resorts. For example, the cross-country ski resort at which I'm skiing in this video is located in the Sierra Nevada mountains, whereas in the Midwest at a groomed cross-country ski area, You may only have some really small hills with less than a couple of 100 feet of elevation gain between the highest point and the lowest point of that resort, so everything is generally going to be flatter. But chances are you're still going to have a green, blue, black rating system at that ski resort. So just make sure you take that into account when you're planning out your route for cross-country skiing that day if you're new to that cross-country ski area. Another note about the rating systems for cross-country ski areas is that each trail then becomes another microcosm of the greater whole. For example, each trail is rated based on specific terrain features of that specific trail. So a blue will have some relatively steep downhills, but it will also be punctuated with some flat areas. Same goes for black terrain or advanced terrain. You may end up with some really steep stuff like nearly a 30-degree angle, but chances are you're also going to have some flat areas in which to travel through. So even though each of those trails has their own unique rating, there's a really high probability that that rating is not going to be sustained throughout the duration of that trail. Again, you may have 3/4 of a mile of a black trail, but there may only be 2 or 3 really steep pitches that you have to deal with, and in between those steep pitches are a couple of flatter areas. And this is important to understand because all those areas that are not super steep or really windy, for example, are areas in which you can recover. So when we're talking about terrain management and route selection, just know that there will be places that you could pause to gather yourself after you've finished negotiating something that may or may not be more difficult than your current skill level. I don't offer this little bit of knowledge so that you go out and start skiing all these different challenging trails that are well beyond your current skill level, but rather so that you can understand that you don't have to look at the entire big picture of all day. You just need to get through this one section of a 1/4 mile of steep stuff, or this 300-meter windy section that may be pushing you beyond your limits of making turns on steep angle terrain. You don't have to do it all at the same time. You just need to get past this one section to reach safety, and so on and so forth. And again, this is primarily if you find yourself having bitten off more than you can chew, and you just need to get to much easier terrain. You don't have to get down pretty, you just have to get down. In a lot of respects, this approach is no different than how most of us approach life. As much as we'd like to have that eye on the future and plan for a month, 6 months, 6 years down the road, most of us are just trying to get through the day. So let's just look at this beginner cross-country ski experience over some slightly challenging terrain to be the same way. Let's just get through those challenging times in order to get to the easier ones so that we can reevaluate and determine what we need to learn in order to be able to more safely and enjoyably negotiate more challenging terrain. The angle of terrain or the steepness of the hill is usually the deciding factor for a lot of people, particularly new people to cross-country skiing, that will help them or discourage them from venturing down this trail or that. It's the downhill part. Most people can walk up, sidestep, herringbone. They can get up something steep, but getting down that steep section is relatively challenging if you don't possess those necessary downhill skills on cross-country skis. To that, I would remind you that in my 4th part of Introduction to Classic Cross-Country Skiing, I talk about basic downhilling technique for cross-country skis, primarily at groomed cross-country ski areas. So essentially, the terrain on which I'm showing you today. In that video, I show tools that can help you manage those hills. If you're relatively new to cross-country skiing, you probably learned early on or experienced early on the fact that even a low-angle hill can be really fast on cross-country skis. And the reason for this is simply because they're so long, straight, and skinny. There's just not much resistance to going downhill. Depending on resort, green trails can still feature formidable little hills that can cause you to fall down if you don't have adequate downhilling technique. So that's why I say manage your expectations, manage the terrain by acknowledging that even though it may not be a very steep hill, it's still a hill and it demands your undivided attention. In some of the clips that I present in this video, take note of those sections where I have to go uphill, and then upon immediately going downhill, you'll notice I'll quickly get up to speed just after I've crested the hill. Again, this is just the nature of cross-country skis. They're skinny, they have pronounced glide zones, and they want to go fast, but they also want to go fast in a straight line and for long distances. As you're venturing into new terrain, if you're graduating from green trails to blue intermediate trails, take note of the angle in which you're skiing uphill, because you're going to eventually have to come down that same angle. Even if you're skiing a loop rather than an out and back trail, for example, what goes up must come down. So you may be faced on the other side of that peak that you summit with either steeper or maybe less angles, but lots of switchbacks. So just always be paying attention to where you're skiing, one, so that you're never lost, and then two, so that you can evaluate how far you want to go up that mountain. Does that trail have a lot of turns included? Do you have the skills necessary to make those downhill turns so that you don't go flying off the trail into the forest or off the side of a cliff, for example? You also want to take into consideration the quality of snow on which you're skiing. Is it dry, cold, fresh snow that feels like fine grit sandpaper and doesn't ski very fast? Or has the snow transformed, having gone through multiple freeze-thaw cycles, and now you're on boilerplate ice first thing in the morning? That's not specifically beginner, intermediate, and advanced terrain dependent, but there are days that I tone down my ski excursion when it's super icy conditions and I don't want to risk falling down. I may totally avoid those black trails and just stick to easier green and blue trails. As you saw in that last clip, while I was skiing down that black trail, there were a handful of people skiing up the trail, which brings me to another aspect of terrain management, which isn't technically part of the terrain, but rather it's the people using the terrain, i.e. your fellow skiers out on the trail. Generally speaking, at a full-groomed cross-country ski area where they offer both classic tracks and a skate lane, the trails are going to be relatively wide because the grooming machine that lays all those tracks is quite large. Thanks to these wider trails, you have pretty good line of sight in all directions, so you can plan accordingly when you do see another skier approaching you, or if you hear one skiing behind you, for example. I'll cover skier etiquette in another video, but just know that, based on common sense, give people a wide berth. Particularly if you're going downhill and somebody's coming uphill, move to the side so that there's no possibility whatsoever of actually colliding with somebody. I also recommend slowing down in difficult terrain just to give all parties enough time to respond or react if something did happen. Be especially careful when approaching an intersection because that's oftentimes where a person or a group of people will stop and congregate. Either they're trying to determine where they want to go next or they're waiting for somebody to catch up. And intersections can be just a really dangerous location, so always pay attention. With that in mind, if you do need to stop and take a break, don't become the obstacle that everyone else has to avoid. Step off the side of the trail, pay attention to what's going on around you, especially if you are stopping to look at the map at the intersection, for example, because a lot of skiers won't even bother to slow down. They're just going to zip on through. So again, just be mindful of your surroundings when you're stopping to take a break. Green trails are going to be generally busier than more advanced trails, just for the simple fact that there are more beginner cross-country skiers out there than there are advanced skiers. So more skiers on the trails means more obstacles to avoid, which inspires or compels me to ski on different trails. Trails closer to the cross-country ski resort or parking area are going to generally be more busy because you're going to get the traffic that's either leaving the resort or returning to the resort. Essentially, this is unavoidable if there's basically one way in and one way out. So you can't use those particular trails as a litmus test to determine how busy the resort is. It's always going to appear busy on those thoroughfares. That said, I try to make my way through those thoroughfares as quickly as possible, or I'll take alternate routes sooner rather than later to get to other aspects of the resort, just so I can avoid the crowds. Another aspect of terrain management that's not technically part of the terrain, but it directly affects how you ski the terrain, are the lighting conditions of the day. It should be pretty obvious the difference between this series of me skiing downhill and the previous ones. In those previous ones, I was skiing on basically bluebird days or days with at least partial sunlight, so there was better contrast to everything around me. I could see the classic tracks fine, I could see where there was a turn in the trail, but on this day where it's snowy and overcast and the light is very flat, it's hard to discern where the actual trail begins and the edge of the trail starts. And that's one reason why you hear me braking a lot more while skiing downhill. Not only am I transitioning from black diamond terrain down to blue and green terrain, but I'm doing so on a day where I can barely see because of the flat light and the snowflakes hitting my eyes. Now, you can always get specialized glasses that will help bring out the contrast in these flat light conditions, but at the same time, they may just get covered with snowflakes anyway if it's snowing. So it's just challenging conditions, so I play it safe in those conditions. I wish I had for you definitive benchmarks that would clearly define a green versus a blue versus a black trail, but the reality is, they all have similar components. They're just slightly more amplified the more advanced you go. So even though a green trail is mostly going to be flat, there's still going to be some small hills in there to negotiate. And even though most blacks are going to incorporate really steep angles of terrain, plus some really sharp turns, they also will occasionally feature some flatter areas in between. That said, there are some blacks and double black diamond trails that are just literally a shot straight down the hill. In many respects, those types of trails are just a means to an end trail. They're not something that you would go and specifically seek out to ski. A lot of times this would be like a connector trail bridging two lesser severe trails. And this should be relatively obvious if you look on the map and see that it's just one little tiny trail, like a quarter of a mile long or less. In that case, if it's a black, or double black for that matter, it's probably just going to be a really steep pitch. And I would not advise beginners to even attempt something like that. Okay, that's enough for this particular video. I think I'll just wrap it up and then let you enjoy the remaining ride down the hill in silence. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have any questions or feedback, post it in the comments section below. And then check out TahoeTrailGuide.com for more information about cross-country skiing. If you feel compelled to financially support Tahoe Trail Guide and this YouTube channel, I offer a Patreon, PayPal, and Venmo option for doing just that. I just want to say I really appreciate everyone for supporting this channel and my website, all of my Patreon subscribers, people who have sent me tips and gratuities via PayPal and Venmo. And then, of course, all of you who are watching and commenting. I really enjoy having the conversations that we do. So please continue to send questions my way and tell me what else you'd like to see me produce. Okay, folks, take care.